Your meeting is now live.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I can see that we've got about 33 participants at the moment, so I think we've got most people would be expecting. I'm just going to hit mute all quickly and then obviously bring people in as they wish to speak. Right, well, good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Partnership for South Hampshire. I hope everybody can see and hear appropriately as we've gone through. Please do try and use the hand function if you'd like to say something. It'll be much easier to find you that way. The first item on the agenda is apologies for absence and to note any changes in the Joint Committee membership. And I've received apologies from Charlotte Lyne from the Environment Agency, for whom we're expecting to have Kate Banfield deputising. Also Edward Heron from the New Forest and Nick Adams-King from Test Valley and Stuart Jarvis from Hampshire County Council. So I'll ask first whether anybody has any other apologies that they need to add into the mix. If you do, please pop a hand up. Okay, all right. We'll now move then to, I'm just trying to see whether he's here, Gavin Parker is the new chairman at the New Forest National Park. Gavin has replaced Oliver Crosswaite-Eyre, who was the previous representative as chairman on the Joint Committee. So, Gavin, you are most welcome, and I can see you there. So, you're most welcome to the Partnership for South Hampshire Joint Committee.
Thanks very much, Sean.
Okay. Right, we'll now move on to item 2, which is the minutes of the last meeting, all the way back on the 30th of September. I'm probably going to do all of the recommendations, etc., by a sort of negative assent. So if anybody has an issue with anything that we're looking to approve this evening, please raise your hand. So I'm going to say that the minutes of the 30th of September are agreed, unless I see a hand shooting up, which I don't. Okay, so those minutes are agreed. So we move to item 3, which is Chairman's announcements. I don't have any announcements this evening. Item 4, declarations of interest. Anyone has any, please raise your hand. Councillor Grajewski, Hampshire County Council. Judith.
Thank you, Chairman. I have an interest in agenda item 8, creative industries built environment. Looking at the government's definition of the creative industries and also the Creative Network South website, I declare an interest as a director of a creative advertising agency, also as the mother of a boy who's studying creative lighting control for television, theatre and video, which he can't do at the moment, and a daughter who's a professional freelance musician who has only done 2 performance engagements since last March. Thank you. And
interests.
Sorry, yes, and agenda item 9, the nutrient neutrality update. Given the grant that's been awarded, I am a non-exec director of the Solent LEP on the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, I see no other hands up to declare interests, so therefore we'll carry on the agenda to item 5, which is deputations. We don't have any. Then item 6 is the Push Coordinators report. So if I can draw you to the right pages on the agenda, this is pages 11 to 24, and Paddy May is with us as the Push Coordinator. So Paddy, your report.
Thank you, Chairman. So a reminder that the Coordinator report has 2 parts to it. Part A is items for decision and Part B is matters for information. And the items on the Coordinator report are those that don't warrant a report in their own right. We have one Part A item on this report, and it's asking for agreement for a statement of common ground between Havant Borough Council and the Partnership for South Hampshire. It updates the one that's previously agreed in July 2019, and it's been updated to reflect sort of further information and to reflect that the actual Havant plan hasn't been submitted yet. To confirm, it's actually a statement of common ground between Havant and Push as a collective body, and it doesn't sort of like prejudge anything that individual authorities may wish to discuss or within statements of common ground themselves with haven't. If members of the Joint Committee approve it, it will be signed on behalf of PUSH by myself. So that's the Part A item. Part B, which is the matters for information. Most of these relate to agenda items that are actually on the Joint Committee today. So we've got stuff on the Statement of Common Ground, we've got the KPIs for the bird aware, we've got sort of an update around the water management, which is picked up through the nutrient neutrality item, and then the energy and the green economy bit, which is done through the green print. So, and then finally on the culture creative industry. So all of those are being picked up through the main agenda items, as opposed to anything specific in this report.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Paddy. So turning to the recommendations and the report. First, does anybody have any questions or comments they'd like to make on the report, either Part A or Part B? I'm not seeing any hands. Then we have two recommendations. The recommendation A is to note and endorse the update to the Statement of Havant Borough Council and the Partnership for South Hampshire Common Ground. Looking to see whether there's anybody who has any issue with doing that. Please raise your hand if you have a problem. And then the second one, to note the matters for information in Part B of the report. Okay, then that is agreed. So we now move on to item 7, and this is the green print for South Hampshire. So you need to turn to pages 25 to 32 in your agendas. And for this item, we have Alison Barnes, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the New Forest National Park Authority, and also Simon Eden from the Southern Policy Centre. And we also have in attendance as well today Joseph Owen from the University of Southampton, and I think David Hutchinson from Portsmouth University. So welcome to both of you, and if you do need to add anything, if there are any questions, then obviously I'll bring you in to do that. So I'll hand over now to Simon and Alison for your presentation.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to kick off. Good evening, members. And thank you, Chairman, for introducing the team for me. What I'm about to present to you with Simon is very much work of a whole team, as is the way with Partnership for South Hampshire, and also a number of colleagues from different authorities. So just to refresh your memory, and you will have seen this in the minutes anyway, at this September meeting, the committee agreed to us officers working with colleagues from different sectors, from particularly higher education with our representatives here, to prepare a green print for South Hampshire. So this was to articulate shared objectives where green credentials really cut across economic and social issues as well, and also to reflect the national agenda, which was certainly sort of emerging when we last spoke and has been added to since we spoke, with the 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, which you'll recall that the Prime Minister announced since we last spoke. So we've been doing a lot of work with a number of people to bring together what you see in front of you today. The steering group that we have had, as well as the colleagues that Sean has introduced to you this evening, have been a number of colleaguds from our councils, so HCC, Portsmouth City Council, Southampton, Eastleigh, and of course the local enterprise partnership, the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership, as well as other colleagues such as my colleagues from the New Forest National Park Authority and the Green Halo Partnership. They have steered what you see in front of you, so it's very much a team effort. You will also note, and Simon will give you some more details on this, that we're not building what we're presenting to you from scratch. What we've done, what we've proposed, is very much based on a foundation of what we're all doing already. Joseph Owen, who has been an amazing resource, so I must just give him a name check there, from Southampton University has done a 3-month placement with us and has really taken a lot of time in analysing what we're all doing on the issues that pertain to the green print. So what we're proposing is very much drawing together what is already out there and presenting it, we hope, in a way which reflects our shared understanding of our area and how that links into national priorities as well as our own local ones. I think uniquely what we want to do is to alight upon something which really reflects our special character as an area. So we're not just this isn't just a green print for anywhere. We don't want another area to be able to pick this up and read themselves directly in it. This needs to be something unique to ourselves. So obviously we're very interested to hear your comments about how that comes across in a moment. So that's part of our first recommendation. Does this framework reflect what your understanding of our shared priorities would be and how we might articulate that for our area? We're looking for your endorsement as well to further this work. So if these are indeed the right priorities, would you be happy for us to go forward as a partnership to look at key projects and programmes to realise the framework? And also, would you agree to us as officers broadening out discussions to neighbouring authorities? So that's the summary of the paper. I'm going to hand over to Simon now just to give you a little bit more detail about how we've arrived at it so that you could see some of the workings, if you like, before I open up to discussion with permission of the chairman. So Simon, over to you.
Alison, thank you, and an evening, members and colleagues. What I want to do is just do a short PowerPoint to share screen, if I can find that. There we go. Why is it computers always fail to allow you to do the things you want to do? While I'm waiting for this, I'll start by talking while I'm waiting for this to turn into a proper PowerPoint presentation. Can members see the screen okay? Otherwise, at least see the slides we're presenting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not going to let me turn this into a slideshow. So
Simon, just click at the bottom right hand corner next to the little plus and minus, the little left a bit. There's like a picture of an old fashioned, what's that, screen, just right at the bottom there. Right a bit.
Oh yeah.
There you go. Press that.
Hey, you learn something new every day, including that this is doing nothing for me. Oh, there we go. Thank you, David. That's why we have somebody from the University of Portsmouth on board to help us, you see. Us mere former local government officers can't cope with this. Alison said a lot about the background to this and the discussions that we had at the Joint Committee last time. I want to just emphasise two things quickly, one of which is to re-emphasise a point that Alison made. The ambition that we articulated and members agreed at our last meeting was to create a more prosperous, fair, resilient and environmentally aware society. In other words, this isn't just about the environment, this isn't just about the economy, it cuts across those three strands of economy, environment and society and joins them together. The second point I want to make, and this was something we did talk about again at the Joint Committee last time, was that this is a framework to capture, articulate and provide a basis for collaboration on what we're doing as a region already. It's not a new burden, it's not a new plan or an additional requirement, it's not going to create additional demands for resource. It's trying to draw together the good work that's already going on across the partnership and articulate that clearly and coherently as a plan for thinking about that joined up green recovery that ticks those three boxes. It's about finding the best way of articulating our shared aspirations. Now, Alison outlined the work that Joseph led, and his starting point was to see what we're already saying as local authorities, as a local enterprise partnership across the area. And Joseph went through local plans, went through other key strategic documents, and came up with a long list of policy themes which emerged from those documents. And our task was then to boil those down to something which really captured the shared aspirations. And that work was done, as Alison said, using colleagues from the steering group, talking collectively, interviewing those individually, and also talking to others that steering group colleagues pointed us towards. And the net result of that, as you see in the paper, was bringing together or narrowing those themes down into 4 broad policy themes, from biodiversity, safeguarding biodiversity and natural capital, through to creating sustainable jobs and construction. So you'll see they start to be pretty broad, and they start to address environmental, economic and social aspirations that we share as well. These were the ones out of that long list that people believed were perhaps the most significant shared priorities. They're not there to the exclusion of other people's individuals' priorities, local authorities or LEPs or whoever's individual priorities, but these are the things we share and we've jointly and collectively articulated in the various documents we looked at. Now, you can look at those and say, yes, that's fine, but if I went to an area in Norfolk or Lancashire, they'd probably be saying fairly similar things. The trick is to also try and understand them in terms of what's distinctive about South Hampshire, our area. So we looked at some of the distinctive characteristics of our region. Again, I won't go through the list, they're in the report, but from our environment, the coastline, the parks, our rich biodiversity, right through to that shared vision for climate resilience and working with business and industry, with technology and innovation to tackle that. What makes us distinctive is when you start combining those characteristics, they paint a pretty unique picture of our area. So the next challenge, again going through this with the working group, was to say, well, how do we articulate what are priorities, drawing on those policy themes, but also drawing on our regional characteristics, our regional distinctiveness. To cut a long story short, the same discussion with steering group colleagues and others led us to these 5 proposed priorities. They're all phrased and articulated deliberately as outcomes that we want to achieve. And they range again from, if we look at the top one, achieving net zero in terms of carbon emissions for our economy, but also for communities, for housing and so on and so forth, right through to looking at excellence in the skills and the green jobs that we can offer. So our suggestion to members is that these 5 priorities articulate 5 shared outcomes for organisations, local authorities, LEPs, but others as well. We think some of the higher education institutions and other organisations across the South Hampshire area. And the important thing about these priorities is that, as I said right at the beginning, they provide a framework within which we can look at what we're doing already and ask ourselves the question, are we helping to deliver these shared objectives? Do they identify areas where different councils, different organisations can collaborate and cooperate? You have a long appendix to the report, although that appendix isn't complete, but it starts to identify policies in a number of different areas, policies and programmes, which do respond to this and are helping us deliver the 5 outcomes we've suggested here. I've boiled that down to just some examples here to show how, whether it's technology-related projects, development-related projects, right through to skills or environmental projects, do address different aspirations. What we can do with this framework is use it to ask ourselves the question, well, in thinking about any of these policies, any of these programmes, how we're addressing these priorities, the outcomes we seek, is there more we could do to perhaps build in additional benefits for the area? Does it provide areas where we ought to be collaborating, given we share these objectives? Now, as Alison said, these are a start of 10. The Joint Committee will have views on whether they reflect and articulate a picture that they recognise for the outcomes together we want to achieve. Subject to discussion here, we think we should be broadening that conversation to get wider ownership with individual partnership councils and other organisations as well. Particularly, we think with the business community as well, who, particularly through the LEP, have been part of this conversation, but I think we need to reach out to them more to discuss this because they contribute on so many fronts. We also think we ought to be reaching across the push boundaries, because of course our environment and many of our economic and other aspirations don't necessarily recognise those boundaries. So we suggest we should be talking to colleagues in the Isle of Wight, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, for example, perhaps other areas as well. And we've already, of course, had Hampshire County Council on the steering group as a key part of this discussion with their wider perspective on a green recovery. I'll just finish by noting that Joseph and I spoke to the Push Planning Officers Group on Friday to share this and sort of road test this in a way, and we had a useful conversation with them there. They, of course, will be key in helping to develop this framework and helping with implementation through the local authorities, individuals and shared local plans and the joint statement, joint planning statement. So I'm going to finish at that point, Chair, and I think back to members for questions and comments, please.
Thank you very much indeed, both to Alison and to Simon now. Would you like to unshare your screen, please, Simon, so people can...
Oh, I should have done it. Apologies, Chair. I'll see if I can get rid of it. Is that
okay? Yes, success. Thank you for that. Thanks.
I'm learning fast. I'm learning fast.
Okay. Right. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they'd like to ask or make on this? Starting with Councillor Neil Cutler from Winchester. Neil.
Thank you, Chair. One area that we wondered whether there is value in the green print, looking at the possibility of all that regionally we use the same technique for measuring carbon emissions, so that there is genuine comparison across the push area. Would there be any value in some of the work on the green print looking at that as a possibility?
Alison, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think obviously the first step is for us to agree that these elements are the right ones. And of course, with net zero, having a common baseline from which we are measuring that would be absolutely key. So I think certainly would want to do that. And then after that, for each element, for the net zero element, we'd then be looking at projects and programs that would implement that, and also metrics. So in order to have a measure of success, you do need a baseline as well. So absolutely, yes. And I think we would certainly want to be bringing forward baselines for the other elements. And I see Brian Johnson has his hand up. I'm delighted that the Solent LEP is already supporting a baseline to look at natural capital in the New Forest catchment area. And I know, well, I'll let Brian speak for himself, but, you know, again, that may well be something we could extend to a wider geography in order that we have that data as well to base our programme on. So I hope that's a helpful answer. I don't know if Simon wants to add to that, or any other colleague from the team.
I was only going to add, Chair, and I'd just expand a bit on what Alison said. And Councillor Cutler, you may remember from the last joint committee report, there is a whole swathe of work to be done under these principles once they're agreed, to identify exactly what we mean, exactly how we measure them, the sort of metrics for that. And a key part of that on carbon, on everything else as well, is going to be having some consistent basis, because if what we're trying to foster is collaboration, there's very little to be achieved through that collaboration if we're all sort of understanding slightly different things by how we're going to measure our success. So I think that's absolutely vital that we get that right on carbon and on other things as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon. Brian Johnson from Solent Local Enterprise Partnership.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. Great presentation. Just a couple of questions from me. And the first one's perhaps my lack of knowledge in this subject. But what does net zero with nature mean as opposed to net zero is my first question. And my second observation would be that early in the assumptions, you talked about us being a prosperous area. I think we need to be we need a bit more depth into that, because I think the thing we all know is there are areas of prosperity in our region. but generally, particularly for the south of England, we are not a prosperous area, and that's one of the key things in our bids for things like free ports and bids for levelling up. And I think we just need to think about making that comment about us being a prosperous area, bearing in mind we want to make levelling up think about coastal regions and our region and not just the north. So one question and one observation.
Okay, shall I make a start, or Simon, would you like to just comment on the way you articulated, I think, in your presentation first?
If I can perhaps do it back to front, Chair. I think, Brian, you're absolutely right about this. It's a phrase we use in so much. We're prosperous, and it's how we sell ourselves in a sense, isn't it? And positivity. You're right. It's much more of a curate's egg in terms of when you break it down. There are challenges, particularly within the cities, in places like Gosport as well, and we need to think how we address that. And digging behind that slogan of prosperity, the outcomes we're trying to achieve, the greater skills, the health inequalities, because it's not just a patchy picture on the economy, it's a patchy picture on health and educational attainment and so many other things as well. We need to be a bit careful about the blurb we use to sell it, but I think behind it there is a genuine recognition that there are things we need to address and inequalities we need to address, and of course we use that phrase inequalities in trying to define the outcomes a bit more clearly. Alison is the best person to talk about net zero with nature because she's absolutely passionate about it. But what I will say in my drier bureaucratic way first is this is about actually trying to capture many of our environmental strengths and use the value, the natural capital in that environment to help us reduce carbon. Of course, there will be technical solutions and things like that, but I think it's the opportunities we have because of the rich environment to actually utilise that to help reduce carbon should also be recognised and should be taken advantage of, if you like. But Alison will now do the much more inspiring version of that.
Thank you. No question. I mean, what I would say, Brian, is that everyone can do net zero. Not everyone can do net zero with nature. And what we try to articulate here is something unique to our area. So, we will be doing, I guess, some of the same net zero stuff as you would see anywhere. So we've got David Hutchison here, and I know that the partnership he's involved in, which is called Future South, has a lot of experience around green tech. So, I mean, that's absolutely there. But the way we've actually presented it to you, we've tried to give you something that we can uniquely offer for our area. So the natural solutions is the jargon that is used, but the way that we work with nature and through nature to find climate solutions as well. So that's what that means. So, it's up for debate, but the reason it's articulated like that is because we believe that is something pretty unique to our area and our opportunities. The other thing I would say around prosperity, one thing I didn't cover at the end of my presentation was, I mean, absolutely, there are issues around inclusivity and, things like health inequalities, something that we can all recognise massively at the moment. And certainly the Natural Health Service we've put in there is a look at that. But when you do look at frameworks for levelling up, certainly, we've spoken a lot about the free port criteria over the last couple of weeks. Whether we are going to be seen as needing as much levelling up as elsewhere is a sort of open to debate. So what this framework we hope does is to show that these elements in combination give us a real edge on other national priorities. I mean, this isn't just about national priorities, although I think we could be world leading in this. But I think it's also about us articulating our local circumstances and what we can do for our communities. So I hope that answers your question. There are some real pockets of deprivation in our area, even in the New Forest National Park, which is one of the places where the highest property prices in the whole of the country. But I think in terms of us getting a real edge in some of these national programs, where we are going to be seen as world class is around implementing something like this really, really well together, alongside some of the things that we want to do for the social and economic life of our area. So I hope that's okay, Brian, in terms of an answer.
Chair, just before you, can I just add one bit, which is a bit of, and I apologise, a slight advertisement for Southern Policy Centre, but Brian talked about levelling up and the challenges that we will face when the levelling up debate gets going nationally. Southern Policy Centre are doing a bit of work to look at how we can articulate what the challenges are in our area, and so respond to that levelling up argument. And we're happy to share that with Push colleagues as soon as that's come together. So that might help that wider discussion, I think.
Thank you for that. That's helpful, Simon. Next, Councillor Michael Wilson, Leader of Havant. Michael.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, I'm another leader with an area where we're very aware of pockets of deprivation, so that's of interest to me, and thank you, Brian, for raising that point. Looking at the 5 themes, developing affordable and efficient housing is obviously one of them, and I wondered how you feel this particular theme will square with the housing white paper, which is due to come back to us soon, and whether you think that that will have any bearing on the green print.
Do you want me to start, Alison? Yes, I mean, we'll need to watch out for the housing white paper, and of course there's always a fear that in essence that's going to be about numbers, and we need to not quite push back against that, but I mean, I think we all know there are housing challenges on the patch, and that's why we've identified the need to not necessarily build housing per se, but respond to the affordable housing challenge and find ways of together doing that, and maybe together responding to the white paper to say we need to do this to help us meet the affordability challenges, which are a particular characteristic of our part of the world by comparison with many of the sort of levelling up constituencies, if you like. But there are also opportunities that Push have talked about before, I know, for responding to housing growth agenda by bringing in new skills to make those houses more energy efficient and ready to deal or respond to some of the climate challenges. So we will get the white paper down the road, and we can all guess roughly the direction it's going to be taking us. But in the meantime, we can also try and refine how we respond to that to meet specific local challenges. And I think that's what this framework is trying to do, give us something that we can say, here's what we want to do as the Partnership for South Hampshire, not just as individual councils. And the partnership is powerful in responding in that sense, because it represents a good number of local authorities in a sizable community. So can push back on, okay, housing, but this is how we want to do it down here. Something to do it with it being more sustainable, and something to do with it being more inclusive and meeting the particular needs of our communities, and those sort of that patchwork of need on housing as on other things as well.
May I chip in there? I mean, Councillor Wilson is undoubtedly, these other policy things are flying in from all angles, the housing white paper being one of them. But my hope is that if we have a really strong vision and a worked up framework for our area that aligns with policies that we all already have and a number of projects we already have. And actually one of the partners I've had a good chat with recently is Radiant Homes, which is obviously, you know, a big social housing provider. There are a lot of synergies with what they would want to see in terms of design, retrofit for carbon and things like that, but also going on their experience of the last year, having green space and places where communities have, the ability to breathe, if you like, is just vital. And I think we can project something about how that whole package, that aspiration to be, green and to deliver this green industrial revolution, this 10-point plan from the centre, what that really looks like on the ground. And of course, that really does include housing, because that's one of the major for economic revival that the government has its eye on. So my hope is that if we agree this, and then we can articulate what it means and show examples, we are going to have some very interested people at the centre about how we might deliver this. So I'm always hopeful and optimistic, even though it is quite challenging.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else got any questions or points they'd like to make? Okay, I don't see any. So,
can I briefly just add something, Chair? Is that possible?
Yes, of course. Please do.
I'm David. I'm one of the other authors. Just to say that that's a perfect example, I think, of where South Hampshire are providing leadership already, and where by bringing it together we can be, well, we can add value. So you've got flagship projects like, I don't know, Wellbourne, Fawley, Tipner, the stuff going on in Eastleigh Borough Council. All of these are well beyond probably what's going to be in the white paper for housing, and collectively demonstrates some really significant leadership on a national scale. So I think it's a really good example of how we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but just bring all this stuff together to create a green print that then potentially feeds into some of the other issues, like, there will be areas as we're making this transition to net zero with nature where we have to mitigate. But, Portsmouth Port, are a municipal port, they're owned by the people of Portsmouth. They're looking to be the first net zero port in the country, but they know to do that they want to mitigate, and they'd much rather invest in green space in South Hampshire than they would plant trees in the Amazon rainforest or something. So there's a lot of stuff that we can do to join this up to make us an area where we're completely recognised as being on the front foot and demonstrating that you can have development, but not at the cost of the earth, as it were. And I think, we can do that, and then that brings in prosperity. And obviously, if you're thinking of economic prosperity, that's fine. But actually, if you think of prosperity in its widest sense, thinking about health and well-being, then you start to bring value to people's lives that is quite significant, as many of us have experienced during the lockdown. That the being able to connect with the blue and green space around us has been massively important for health, well-being, and mental health. So that's just a few thoughts in addition.
Thank you very much indeed.
Chairman, if I may just thank Joseph again very visually to everybody, because his placement ends in about 2 days' time, and he spent 3 months with us, and he's done an amazing job for us. And I wanted to also thank Southampton University for supporting him coming to us as a partnership, and the part they have played in realising this vision. You've done an amazing job, Joseph. Congratulations, and it's been great to have you as the next generation that we're doing this all for, as our conscience as well. So thank you. Back to you, Chairman. Sorry about that. But
thank you very much. Thank you to Alison and Simon and David and Joseph. I can see you there as well. Thank you for the work you've put into this. Right, so we can turn to the recommendations now then, and we have 3 of them, and on page 25. I can see anybody that does not wish to support them, please speak now or put a hand up. I see no hands. Those 3 recommendations are agreed. Now move to item 8, which is Creative Industries Built Environment. That's one of our themed panels. Page 33 onwards is where members need to be. And for item 8, we have Charles Freeman with us as the panel lead, and also Dominic Lister from the Culture, Design and Built Environment. So, Charles, are you there? And I can see Dominic now. Charles, I can just see a sign that says you need to start your camera.
Ah.
There we go. you there? No, you've gone entirely.
I'm entirely now, okay. I'll try again.
Yeah. No, all we have is a sign saying start
Uh,
your cam.
If I may, I will go ahead.
You can speak.
My camera will behave in due course. Thank you, Chair. The panel has two areas in its work programme. Design in the built environment, which is led by the Quality Place Practitioners Group, and Dominic is the chair of that group, and the Creative Industries, which is led by Creative Network South, hosted by Hampshire Chamber of Commerce and chaired by David Joel, President of the Chamber of Commerce. What might be helpful is if I split the report into two sections which kind of follow those two areas of the work programme, and perhaps take questions after each section, if that would be all right.
Yep. Thank you.
In terms of designing the built environment, the Quality Place Group has been part of Push's work programme from the start. And in the very early days of Push, in fact, Simon was then lead chief executive for this group. There was a capacity study done, which recommended the agreement of a design charter, the development of design guidance, and the setting up of the design awards. Those were all completed in the early stages. The design awards we've run every 2 or 3 years since, and the last iteration was last year, was 2019, just before lockdown. And we hope to do another in 2022. We wanted to update the design guidance a bit recently, and I think it's very timely given the presentation on the green print and the stress the green print puts on quality of design in the built environment. And I'd like Dominic to talk through the design bulletins which cover the new work, which I think will be a continuous ongoing process.
Yes, thank you, Charles. Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Charles mentioned, we've been on this issue of design quality for 10 years plus now, and from the design charter, which was a high-level document looking at the components of quality places, and we've cascaded now down to much more detailed level of guidance. And the group, the Quality Places group, considered that the 4 topics that you can see appendices in Appendix 1 are one of the key areas, covering trees, covering parking within developments, covering the structure, layout and connectivity of new development, and also dealing with external and surface materials. And we thought that those were the 4 key areas, at least initially, that we should focus upon. And those 4 documents, as I say, are set out in Appendix 1, and they drill down into what are the important issues surrounding those different topics, what are the pitfalls, what are the things that make these elements important to the delivery of quality places. I think what's important to note is that the documents are live, that they are subject to further change as and when more detailed national guidance comes out, or more local guidance, and in discussions with relevant authorities such as the Highway Authority. So we will also be updating the content of some of those documents insofar as exemplar projects. So as Simon Eden mentioned earlier, maybe Wellborn, there may be other developments that provide and shine a light on the detail of how some of these component parts together create a quality environment. And I think going back to the previous presentation again about green print, the whole introduction of biodiversity and natural capital within and threading through developments is a very important part of future work, I would suspect. We're dealing with trees, as I say, as one of the component parts, and that's reiterated in the current government's white paper, which stresses that street trees, for example, should become the norm and not the exception, and perhaps that's a complete role reversal from where we are at the present time. It also deals with how we maintain trees, how we incorporate trees in positive public space. The second area in terms of the importance of creating quality places is car parking, notwithstanding how different local authorities may have different standards, but how you integrate parking within developments, whether it's residential or commercial, is a key part of creating street environments that are both walkable and attractive. The third one there, dealing with structure, layout, connectivity, the whole environment and the building blocks of new developments and places is a really key part of the building blocks of a new development. How the different perimeter blocks are knitted together, how the ecology is threaded through these environments, how pocket parks, larger parks, biodiversity connects not just within that development, but also how it connects with the wider environment as well. The last one there, which is number 4, deals with materials and the importance of responding to the context in which developments are situated, whether it's in landscape terms or whether it's to do with its addition to existing settlements. And it covers not just external materials in terms of the built form, but also in terms of surface materials and providing a street environment that's both attractive but also functional, and in the long term that they are robust and that they are maintained to a good standard. So without going into a great deal of detail, fundamentally those are the 4 areas that we're focused on at this present time. What I would say also is that the development of these documents is something that has been funded through the PUSH themed group, and potentially we will be updating those in due course and providing additional topics such as ecology that, as I say, is a cross back to the previous presentation. The documents aren't statutory documents. They're not legal documents. They are there to help inform, provide inspiration, provide aspiration for developers, but also for fundamentally for development management officers and associated councillors, so that when you're looking at a scheme in front of you, or before you even get to a scheme that's in front of you, you can pick up these key components and indicate to potential developers, these are the kind of things we would expect to see. These are the sort of structures, these are the kind of parking arrangements which we believe are important parts of creating a high quality environment. So they can be used in a forward-thinking way, but they're also there as a kind of aide-memoire for developers, for decision makers, and not just through planning, but also at a corporate level, in terms of how you manage your own public spaces. They can be useful documents in their own right in that way. So they can be taken by individual authorities, they can be taken through a planning process and deliver a supplementary planning document and go through a course of community engagement and engagement with local councillors as necessary. And I think there'll be important components into the future when the National Design Code work is produced and published, and I think eventually we will be getting into a situation where coding becomes quite an important component of future planning control. I think that's probably sufficient, Charles. I'm not sure if you want to add anything more than that.
No. Thank you very much, Dominic. That's excellent, and many thanks for your work and Charlotte Webb's work in chairing the group and helping bring these bulletins forward. Shall we take questions on that first bit, and then I'll talk about creative industries in a moment, if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Getting to that stage, I just wanted to draw members' attention as well to the discussion that was held at the Push Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, which was held quite recently, and they considered the report at some length, and we're talking about the importance of addition of car parks as a design bulletin alongside the existing publications, and specifically where tree planting had been used to landscape to lessen their impact. And we are asked to take note of their comments about the importance of having car parks as a design bulletin, specifically the topics of tree planting, bay size, and ample electric charging points. I don't know, gentlemen, whether there's anything you want to add in terms of absorbing that before I move to questions. Anything?
Certainly the issue of tree planting and car parking in general, it could be expanded into what you might call larger car parks as opposed to parking for individual properties. So some sort of communal arrangement of parking, and how landscaping is a key component of that. I think that the scrutiny board were referring to some of the park and ride schemes that exist on the edge of settlements and how those can be integrated perhaps in a better way than some have in the past, in terms of their visual impact. And clearly tree planting is a key component of that. Broader landscaping, not just trees, is an important part of that, just to help soften the effect of such large-scale infrastructure. And I think also the lighting that comes with it. There are certain examples where lighting, it does shine out quite significantly as you move past some of these pieces of infrastructure. So in some ways that relationship of making a place safe through lighting, but also making it soft and an attractive environment in its own right, certainly can be achieved and probably expanded in terms of one of these design bulletins that we have, whether it's the car parking one or whether it's the tree component one.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. Michael, next from Hammond.
Thank you, Sean. Yes, I found these bulletins very interesting, actually, and I think we all welcome the benefits of trees to break up the urban sort of scene and their value generally. Two points that came to me reading through these. One, I had the misfortune to be on our local planning committee for a number of years, and a couple of cases came up there where some quite significant trees were removed because they'd undermined the foundations of houses that had been built subsequently to the trees being planted. And so from an insurance point of view, the house came ahead of the trees. And I just raised that there could be some insurance issues within this that could perhaps work against planting as many trees as perhaps we would like in these urban scenes. The second thing that occurred to me was the commercial vehicles. As a local councillor, I'm plagued with questions about commercial vehicles being parked on the roads, and as people are going to be working from home more and more, I suspect that there would be need to have some provision for what we do with commercial vehicles. I know lots of new developments outlaw the parking of them there, and they just get displaced into other places. So I wondered whether there should be some consideration of screening them in some ways, a specific area perhaps for commercial vehicles rather than just normal domestic.
I can certainly respond to that, or those 2 points. I think the issue of trees, existing trees undermining existing or new dwellings and or their kind of boundary features, that ultimately comes down to making sure that the position of new buildings is sufficiently far enough away from where existing trees are, and that those trees are incorporated into public space, for example, rather than gardens. And it's making sure that the arboricultural report that is done recognises what that tree is, how mature it is, how much additional growth there is to come from it, and what the anticipated likely root spread would be for that tree. So it's very important that from a technical point of view, you understand the nature of what that particular tree is, what it's likely to do, and indeed what the ground conditions are associated with it, and its extent to which it can absorb water and undermine the kind of ground conditions that the particular building is sitting within. So it's a technical issue that the design of the building, its location, the foundation of that particular building, and making sure you understand what the tree is and what its likely future growth is going to be. So I think it's ultimately a technical exercise and making sure that you keep those in the proper way. The issue of commercial vehicles, I think that's something that can be built into future development. It's more difficult with the existing situations, where particularly where a lot of people park on the street, and historically, in many examples, developments from the kind of 30s through to the present, then the streets aren't wide enough to accommodate on-street parking in a satisfactory way. So I think that perhaps needs to be looked at. I think also where parking is available off-street, whether it's in a communal basis or not, there is perhaps scope to enable larger spaces to be provided for. But I think that's something that will have to be delivered through individual authorities and taking a view about whether wide vans or larger vehicles is going to be an ongoing problem into the future, and making sure that your particular supplementary planning document, if that's the way you intend to go, does cover that potential. So it may only be perhaps 1% or 2% or 3% of, or 5% of spaces within a larger development is there to enable some degree of accommodation of larger than car type vehicles. I think that's within your gift to do that. And certainly I see no harm within the car parking document that reference can be made to the need to understand whether it's an issue and how best to accommodate it.
Any other questions or points anyone would like to raise? Okay, then thank you very much both to Charles and to Dominic for your presentation. And I'll turn now to the recommendations, which are part of the report. Recommendations A to G, which includes an agreement of a budget, G being added to the push-based budget. So I'm going to take it those recommendations are agreed, unless anyone has an issue. I see Judith's hand up.
Yes, I don't think we've had the full presentation yet, have we?
Oh, I'm sorry, I tried to leap in slightly too quickly.
Sorry.
Yeah, Charles, you did say you had another element, didn't you?
I was going to talk about the creative industries element, and I've also noticed Gavin Parker's comment in the chat about the National Model Design Guide coming out probably next week, which is a very helpful comment that we'll feed in and reiterate Dominic's point that these are live documents and we will update them as national and local guidance changes. Yeah. Yes, creative industries, and it's, I think, fair to say, as was mentioned at the start of the meeting, that the creative industries have faced a very challenging year. The two-speed economy, I think, would be the correct way of looking at it. Many digital businesses and businesses involved in digital marketing and web design have done extremely well, and actually 70% of our digital businesses in our area are in that digital footprint, whereas businesses in film and performance segment of the sector, and festivals in particular, have had a very difficult and challenging year. And in particular, the freelancers who support that part of the economy, the musicians and the people who do lighting and sound, have had a devastating year. A couple of years ago, we produced our creative industry declaration, and that's guided our work programme. And there were 4 headings. One was about connectivity, and we tried to use micro grants to support opportunities for networking and network building. And we supported organisations like DV Mission 48-Hour Film Challenge, Winchester Design Festival, Ladies Wine, Dine and Design in Southampton, as networking groups, and Venture Fest as part of the showcase. And I think one of the things over the years which has been very pleasing is how many more opportunities there are for networking and showcasing in the region. The second area is skills and work-based learning. We've worked with Artswork on an apprenticeship initiative, and also with the Apprenticeship Hub. The viability of apprenticeships in the creative sector, where the cohorts are small, is very, very challenging. And Artswork have hung in, and I hope they will continue to hang in, but the tariffs are very low for the creative sector. And I think that's an area we would really like to push further, but it's been very challenging. However, Kickstart has been very welcome, and Artswork have negotiated 30 placements through Kickstart and are waiting for clearance to go ahead with their programme from DWP. Our main emphasis has been on enterprise, because the sector, 40% of people working in the sector freelance. We've rebooted Creative Growth, what was Southampton, to be Creative Growth South, so it's available across the patch, across South Hampshire. We're also working with Portsmouth Creates, and we made funding available for Portsmouth Creates, so they got their chief executive in post, and he is working with the partners in Portsmouth to set up business support in the east of the region. We've also worked with the Solent Growth Hub to develop a website identifying how many flexible workspaces, creative studios, recording studios, film and video studios there are in our area. And that number has greatly increased in recent years. And our belief is actually that creative businesses flourish most when they're part of the community and supported with business support. So we're trying to put that in place. And one of the recommendations is that there is, I think, £10,000 in this year's budget that we would like to carry forward so that we can maintain Creative Growth South with some joint funding with Southampton City Council over the next calendar year. We had hoped to get Arts Council support, but they changed their funding programmes just when we were putting in our applications. And so we've had to be flexible and fleet of foot to keep the support going. But we will be, I think, working with local partners to talk to the Arts Council about the more long-term way of supporting the sector. Fourth area is raising awareness of the contribution with the LEP and with other partners, and I'm very pleased to say I was in consult. I had an email today from Stuart Baker at the LEP talking about the 2050 strategy, and we'll be feeding into that work going forward. I think that's probably a good point for me to stop this section of the report and ask for any further questions.
Sorry for jumping ahead of you slightly. Right, any questions on that? And Judith, I knew you'd have one. That's for all your interests. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, no, I was very interested in the built environment as well. It's always nice to have, if it's a large appendix, to have pictures as well. So that was good. I do have some questions on this. Help me here. How large is a micro grant? it sounds small, but it might not be. Do you want to take all my questions, or do you want to answer them in turn?
Let's do them one at the go as we go. So micro grant sounds very small.
Micro grants tend to be about £250 or £500.
Oh, right. That's quite a lot, really. Yes. OK, thank you. On paragraph 14, it talks about the local youth arts organisation Artswork that were delivering an apprenticeship programme. How many apprenticeships have actually been delivered, please?
Right, we've been going quite a while now with it, and it's I think when I last covered it, it was about 45, and I think they've got 7 in the current cohort. Okay, thank you. Quite interested at paragraph 16, paragraph 2 about Creative Growth South. It says the aim of the project is to help freelancers and early stage creative businesses achieve sustainability, which equates to an income of or in excess of £20,000 per annum. And I just wondered if that was turnover, gross profit or net profit. It's intended to be income because I think when I will cut. That is difficult for a freelancer, but it kind of equating to a minimum wage. If they're going to stay in the sector, they need to be able to support themselves. And what we found is a lot of the early stage creatives struggle to get to an income where they can retain skills and remain in the sector. Now, with freelancers, obviously they have expenses and it's turnover, and some freelancers will have quite high expenses in perhaps print and production, or if they're using a lot of equipment and kit. Others will have very low expenses if they're...
Sorry, talking about expenses or costs?
Costs. And so I think where I'm looking for is that the freelancers are building up a sustainable income. Now, the aspiration would be an income from their business of around 20k.
Okay, fine. Thanks very much. Yeah. What was my other question? Yes, I mean, I'm very happy to support recommendations that support the creative industries. I should say that we've never received anything. But looking at the money, the £10,000, I think it is, for Creative Network South, I do wonder what they haven't filed any accounts yet. They're newly listed as a community interest company, but I saw on their website at the weekend that they had funding of £200,000, and I just wondered what their burn rate is and whether they actually need this £10,000.
Creative Network help. I'm not sure where the £200,000 comes from.
Well, there was a pie chart which said that some of it had come from Portsmouth City Council, some had come from Southampton City Council, some had come from the Arts Council, and I can't remember where the rest came from, and I can't find the pie chart at the moment.
I need to check this out because Creative Network South essentially is the partnership between Partnership for South Hampshire and the Hampshire Chamber of Commerce, and the only money we get is the money we get from Partnership for South Hampshire.
Okay.
And so that
sounds looking at the wrong thing.
So somehow something saying the wrong thing has become apparent, and I will have to have a look, and I very much welcome the link because
that's fine. I mean, you know, if they need the money, I'm very happy to support the recommendation. Thank you.
Yes, the only money we get at the moment is the Partnership for South Hampshire money. I'm slightly embarrassed. Something's gone up to suggest otherwise.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions, Judith. Anyone else have anything they'd like to ask? No, I definitely will look at all of the recommendations. So that's A to G So if anyone has any issue with any of those, please raise your hand. I see no hands, so those are agreed. So thank you again, both to Charles and Dominic for their input on those reports. And I will now move to item 9, which is the nutrient neutrality update. And for this, you need to be on page 73 through to page 84. And we have with us David Bibby, as normal, the chairman of the Push Water Quality Working Group, and also in attendance, I think we have Douglas McNabb from DEFRA and Alison Potts from Natural England. So, David, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. As you've said, I'm presenting the report as Chair of the Water Quality Working Group, and it is a further update on the progress which the partnership has been taking to address the issue. Firstly, we did make an appointment to the temporary strategic planning officer post, and that person started just before Christmas, and that's been undertaken as a 12-month secondment by Simon Kennedy from Havant, and the post is being hosted by Fareham, and future reports will hopefully be led by him, but I will still have input into them, so you may see Simon Kennedy reporting, taking the report to the next meeting. The key things from the report, as I say, following the appointment of the temporary officer, they will be reporting both to this joint committee and to the planning officers group, and we've also set up a steering group of local authority representatives as officers to work with him and oversee the work that he's undertaking. The first meeting of that group took place earlier this month. They will also report and work with the planning officers group, and similarly report also to the Water Quality Working Group, which includes the wider membership of further local authority partners who aren't members of the Partnership for South Hampshire, but are also affected by the nutrient issue, and also a number of them have contributed to the cost of the post. The report includes a updated indicative figure of the number of housings that's currently in the backlog, primarily or solely because of the issue, and that's estimated at 773 dwellings in November of last year. And then the key points on funding: the £2 million Getting Building Fund from the government, which has been channelled through the Solent Let. That was, as you remember, following a pushed bid. The delivery of that is going to be the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust to deliver off-site mitigation on the Isle of Wight. That loan was signed off by the Solent Let board on the 11th of December. A business case has been submitted, and the funding agreement for that is now being drafted. We also understand there's a further direct loan from government to the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust, and that will be to fund the purchase of land to provide mitigation on the mainland. And then thirdly, there is the DEFRA pilot online nutrient trading platform, of which 3.9 million is available for that 2-year project. And we're in the first sort of 3-month period up to March of this year of stakeholder engagement. And this will be looking at how we can scale up mitigation to apply for the whole of the affected area. And again, members will be aware that there are some solutions for some areas, but not for others. It's also linked to other wider environmental objectives, such as the permit review, review of agricultural pollution, and the future environmental land management scheme, which will be the successor to the current agri-environment schemes and the common agricultural policy. Also, the discussions between Natural England and the Environment Agency on the potential of a permit review for the wastewater treatment works, both those which have a current permit limit, whether it could be lowered, and particularly for those that don't. My colleagues from DEFRA and Natural England may be able to give a further update on that. But those discussions which have been taking place at direct level, we understand it has raised issues which have wider implications than just the Solent, and therefore those national issues need to be taken into account. And there are other parts of the country that are also increasingly affected by the nutrient neutrality issue, both for nitrates and for phosphates. The voluntary monitoring of discharges from the treatment works, the major treatment works that don't currently have a permit limit, has been ongoing by Southern Water. We should reach the annual anniversary of that in April, and therefore the first year results will give us a basis on which to consider how we take that forward, and discussions are therefore initially taking place between the Environment Agency, Natural England and Southern Water on how that data is best interpreted in terms of then we as local authorities can take a decision on how to progress with that. And then finally, there are 2 appendices to the report. The first one is our response to the comprehensive spending review, where we sought support from government to further assist us with addressing the issue. And secondly, the letter from yourself, Chair, to Christopher Pincher as the Housing Minister on the issue of the impact that this issue is having on housing delivery and the consequences for the housing delivery test and housing land supply, and the reply which we received from the Minister, which unfortunately hasn't given us any relief from that at the current time. There's no detailed recommendations this time. The recommendation is to note the content of the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, David, and thank you for drawing attention to those letters and yes, a rather disappointing response on a subject that we've been raising now for well over 2 years, ever since the nutrient problems first arose. Quick question for you from me, if I may. In terms of the work that was being done by the Water Quality Management Group and on the major study that we looked at before, where we were looking at particular occupation rates for properties, and I was under the impression that they, along with potentially permits as well for water treatment works, were going to be looked at, because I think there was a general view that the figures were probably rather too high for occupations, and especially as they were not all people coming in from out of the area to take up those properties. I just wonder whether any work is being done on that.
That work's ongoing. We have had the report from that, and I think we'll consider how best to bring that back to the Joint Committee and feed into the future work of the Water Quality Working Group. I think in summary, the indications were that looking at the forecast for growth going forward, in reality they're probably lower than was originally estimated, but it doesn't fundamentally change the position about the scale of the mitigation that we need to address in directly the nutrient neutrality issue, but it is encouraging perhaps in terms of the upgrades which may or may not be necessary to treatment works in accommodating development going forward. But I'll see what we can bring back appropriately, either in addressing this issue specifically or more generally on looking at water supply and wastewater treatment going forward.
Okay. All right, thank you for that. Right, questions from members. First, Stephen Philpott, Councillor at Gosport.
Hello, Sean. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the report, David. I noticed you mentioned that that this feeds in to other things such as the national issues relating to the replacement for the Common Agricultural Policy and so on. I'm actually interested in something else as a national or international initiative, and whether or not that's been mentioned or has come up in any of our discussions in terms of the mitigation strategy. In September, 25th of September last year, the Prime Minister signed a pledge with 65 other world leaders to increase to 30% the amount of land in England that would be wilded by 2030. And the figure that he said that he wanted to see, or to get to that 30%, would be an additional 400,000 hectares of land. And that's an additional 400,000 hectares of land. So, I mean, to give an indication as to how big 400,000 hectares is, it's actually 1,545 square miles. And that just so happens to be, almost by coincidence, almost exactly the same size as Hampshire and the Isle of Wight combined. So we're talking about a very, very large area of land in England that needs to be additional land that needs to be found for wilding. And as that fits in very nicely with the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust's initiatives and all the other things that we're trying to do, has that ever cropped up in conversation at all, or in any of the correspondence? Just interested, really.
Not that I'm aware of directly. It may be something that my colleagues at DEFRA and Natural England may respond to. I am certainly aware of that announcement, and I think the government has announced also targets associated with that for tree planting and for increasing coverage of national parks and areas of outstanding natural beauty. And I think there was due to be sort of further consultation and publications out in the course of this year. But I'm afraid I don't personally have any further details on that.
I see. Just wondered, actually, Jim. I'd like to keep that at least at the back of our mind. Can I apologise at this point, Chairman, and say I have another meeting to go to. I gave notice at the beginning of the meeting. I'll have to leave at this point, so I am sorry. I'm going to leave you now. So thank you very much indeed.
Have a safe journey to your next meeting.
Yes, exactly. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Okay. Anything that our other guests, Douglas or Alison, would like to add? I'll just do that first, then I'll come back to you, Judith. Alice? Anything?
No, thank you, Chair. I think David summarised the position very well. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much. Judith?
Thank you. Yes, just one question relating to, I think it's paragraph 12, about the scoping is being done in conjunction with Natural England. It is under and to inform a decision in 2021. And I just wondered when in 2021, and is this likely to slip? Also, the work that Southern Water doing on what's described as a voluntary basis. You know, we yeah.
Okay, well, we do have the two right people here, should be able to answer that, DEFRA and Natural England. Anything you'd like to advise us of in terms of timing on this decision?
So I think that part of the paper is referring to permit review. That's a discussion that has recently been picked up again with Environment Agency, and I believe Charlotte Lyons is with us at the moment. We have provided Environment Agency with our view. They're taking a look at it at the moment, and we anticipate having further conversations on that at the moment. As ever, timing will depend on resources and the scale of what is agreed to happen next. And with no budget certainty at the moment, there will be no certainty over timescale. But I think it's appropriate to say on behalf of Natural England and Environment Agency, we recognise that there's a great deal of interest in this and that it's something that we both see as a priority for resolving and taking forward. So we will certainly keep you up to date as soon as we know what it is that needs to be done next, and we have a timescale associated with it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks. Right, if there are no other questions or comments, then that report is for noting. So thank you for your input into that, David, and also Alison. Right, which brings us on to item 10 on the agenda, which is pages 85 to 114. This is the Solent Recreation Mitigation Partnership, or Bird Aware, as we prefer to call it, budget request and strategy review. And we've got Anna Parry with us both for this report and the report which follows, which is also the site-specific projects. So over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The first report is quite a large report, and it's intended to cover three particular areas, one being the work that's been done regarding the financial protocol decision taken by members in September and to propose a way forward for making good any potential deficit in the contributions. The second being to seek approval from the Joint Committee for the annual budget request, and also to present the findings of the first strategy and financial review of the partnership and seek approval of these findings. For the financial protocol update, the issues related to nitrate neutrality are causing blockages in the local planning system, which is impacting on our income, which comes directly from developer contributions. There is a high expectation that this is temporary and that planning figures will continue to come through during the lifetime of the project. PUSH have approved a financial protocol that should allow in perpetuity funds to cover day-to-day running costs in the short term. The financial situation should be temporary, and whilst the partnership could look to scale back operations in the short term, Natural England and other nature conservationists within the partnership have put the partnership on notice that they won't find this acceptable and may begin objecting to future planning applications. There is a small risk that planning figures don't come through, in which case PUSH has agreed that all local planning authorities will contribute to make good any deficit. And whilst there is a formal mechanism for determining any financial contributions, currently there's not a similar mechanism which details how any deficits would be made good. There would seem to be several different options for how this might best be proportioned between local planning authorities, and the first being option A, that the push contributions are based upon populations of either the whole local planning authority or the percentage of the local planning authority that falls within the area. This would not seem to be suitable as push area does not directly mirror that of the bird aware zone of influence. However, this model could be applied to the population of the areas within the zone. Option B is that historical quarterly records of developer contributions are kept, and these could be used to calculate the average percentage income that each authority contributes, then that be the proportion that the authority contributes in the case that the need to make good any deficit. And option C is projections of future residential developments for each area have been collated. These could be used to calculate the average percentage income the local authority is expected to bring forward, and this could be the proportion that the authority contributes in the case of the need to make good any deficit. Having sought advice from local authority partners, it is a recommendation that option C is taken forward because it is the best approximation to the likely future contributions to the fund and is based directly upon information that have been previously provided to the partnership. Moving now to the budget request. As I explained, we're wholly funded by developer contributions, and the partnership is continuing to grow, and an extract from our 2019-20 annual review showcases some of the achievements by the team, and that's detailed in the report. The amount to which we will receive in the future cannot be accurately predicted. We would look in the first instance to use any reserves to meet shortfall, but have the in perpetuity funds as a temporary draw upon. Again, this is related to the nitrates issue, and all financial concerns surrounding this impact are considered to be temporary. The proposed budget for 2021 is 1,992,000, which includes 1.1 million contribution to the in perpetuity fund, leaving 882,000 for the implementation of mitigation measures, and this also includes the funding of vital monitoring surveys and data collection activities to take place throughout next winter. And the proposed budget is detailed in table 1. It's very similar to request of 2020-2021, and that's because the strategy is already in full delivery mode, and therefore the main activities of the partnership remain unchanged. For information, the reserve fund balance reduced in the last financial year while the in perpetuity fund grew. And moving now to the strategy and financial review. The strategy was endorsed by Push in December 2017 and came into operation on the 1st of April 18. At the time the strategy was endorsed, it was agreed that as well as regular 5-yearly reviews, an initial review of its effectiveness would take place within the first 3 years of operation, and this report forms that initial review of the strategy. The main approach for the review was centred around an implementation review and a literature review, both of which form appendix to this report. And as the partnership is still collating the first 5 years' worth of operational monitoring data, the review is not sought to fundamentally change the overall approach to delivery, though further action may be taken once this monitoring data results for the initial period are available and have been reviewed. The financial review undertaken initially in 2019-20, this identified that the original financial model may not be robust enough to bring the required income to support all planned activities for the entirety of the in perpetuity fund. This finding was central to the strategy review, as taking corrective action at this point is crucial to ensure that it remains fit for purpose. As part of the strategy review, the previous financial review has been revisited and assumptions behind the key variables have been reviewed. I have an enormous debt of gratitude to Southampton for the work that they did on this. And the key part of this work was getting partner local authorities to review anticipated annual planning applications to 2034 and incorporating this information into the financial model. The result is that the existing levels of contribution, along with current policy to raise them annually in line with inflation, should enable the in perpetuity fund to finance the work of the partnership over the full period. The existing model is based on flat rate contribution per dwelling, as the initial partnership agreements, and subsequently a staggered contribution level was agreed from 2018-19. based on the number of bedrooms in each property. The staggered rates were intended to provide the same total income as the flat fee, and as part of the review, partner organisations also included a breakdown of future planning applications by bedroom number. The model has been updated to reflect this and to ensure income forecasts reflect current practices. The financial review and updated forecasts now include inflation, which was omitted from previous models, and long-term interest rate forecasts. These, together with other assumptions and forecasts, lead to a model that enables the work of the partnership to continue for 80 years past 2034 when we cease taking an income. This model and the impacts of COVID will need to be appropriately monitored and reviewed as the situation develops, and a full financial review remains a commitment for every 24 months. Moving to the work of the partnership, we have a celebration of partnership successes to date. We've received and recognised as a leading mitigation scheme, and to this end we've received several accolades detailed in the report. Alongside that, it has a highly dedicated and motivated team who are utilising limited resources to make a positive impact in reducing bird disturbance along the Solent coast. Feedback from coastal users has largely been very positive towards the aims of the partnership, and Rangers records show that around 95.9% of people they engage with are receptive to the key messages they share. The partnership has to a certain extent learnt on the job and is now in a position to utilise experience to date to optimise resources. And relationship building takes time, and the team have been able to build strong positive connections with key landowners and stakeholders across the entire coastal stretch. All partners have remained committed to the partnership. Governance and the internal hierarchy of project board, steering group and various task and finishes groups continue to support the work of the partnership and allow it to remain progressive. The fact that the vast majority of developers are opting into the scheme to provide the mitigation required for the project to achieve the planning permission indicates that it is also providing a useful mechanism for the sector. To flag up some non-financial concerns, they were covered in more detail within the strategy review itself in the area what's gone wrong, how can it be avoided, but the general areas they cover are disturbance monitoring. The survey locations were chosen when the project was still theoretical. With operation experience, new sites should be selected for monitoring purposes after the first 5 years of data have been collected, and a recommendation is made that monitoring is more comprehensive but only undertaken every 5 years, as done by some other mitigation partnerships. Site-specific projects, these are in their initial stages of delivery and so far are progressing. However, there is already concern about how best to keep the project list live and evolving such that at each point of financial awards, the partnership is able to be confident it is supporting the best opportunities and projects. And the need to be proactive, not reactive. Partnership staff represent a relatively small team to cover such a large area and so many different work streams, as there are an estimated 13 million visits to the Solent coast each winter. It's a huge number of visits for the team to be trying to influence. Rangers are spread thinly to cover so much ground geographically and maintain successful working relationships with all stakeholders. It can only really be rectified by more staff or a reduced level of projects through prioritisation. And partnership involvement. Partnership staff need to see a much more consistent level of involvement from all partners, in particular at steering group level, as there is a tendency for some partners to be more proactive and engaged with the work of the partnership than others, which causes a potential imbalance in what can be achieved in different areas, and concern is raised that this will only increase over time if corrected action is not taken soon. As part of the strategy review, we sought a comment from Natural England. They've confirmed that if the conclusions of the financial review are adopted, it will continue to provide adequate mitigation. And there are some recommendations at the end of the report. Chair, would you like me to read them, or is that for you?
That's fine, thank you, Anna. I'll cover those off.
Thank you.
Whether anyone has any questions now on that report. I think what it does emphasise, though, in fact, the number of reports on tonight's agenda, that we're not just about where are the houses going to go, but it's about mitigating the effects of development in the area, and that's the effect on water quality, as we've had in the last report, and the effects on wildlife and the environment generally, which of course is what our award-winning partnership, Aware, does manage to achieve. So does anybody have any questions on any of this? Because it's a very large budgetary issue, but it is one which of course is being fully funded quite rightly by the development which goes on in the area. So So I see no questions, so I turn to those recommendations, which are at the end, well, at the beginning and the end of the report, which are recommendations from A to E. Are those recommendations, anyone got a problem with them? I will take them as agreed. Just a quick question, Annie. You mentioned right at the beginning of when you were talking something about somebody was likely to raise an objection. I didn't quite catch the who.
If we were to scale back some of our mitigation measures at the moment, there may be an objection raised by the environmental partnerships within our team.
Okay, well, we're not proposing that, so that's great. Okay, and straight on then, please, Anna, again into item 11, which is the site-specific projects.
Thank you.
Is there anything you need to say on this one? So obviously it's mainly charts, maps, and I think we've had a good look at it.
Yeah, we're seeking endorsement for revised recommendations of how site funding should be allocated. We're projected to have £400,000 per annum to allocate towards site-specific projects, and a series of recommendations went to push in July 19, but one of the supported projects has withdrawn from the scheme, allowing us to contact all proposers of approved and reserve list projects to seek mobilisation information and engage with them, and to bring to you tonight a revised schedule of projects. The Joint Committee is now asked to note and endorse this new schedule.
Okay, thank you very much indeed for that. And so that is the recommendation, note and endorse. Any questions on that report? And I will say that they are noted and endorsed unless I see any movement to the contrary, which I don't. So that's done. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
We now move, excuse me, we now move to our final item, which is the push meeting schedule, which covers both the Joint Committee, the Leaders Joint Committee, and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And of course, we have been having these meetings, seems like forever, held like this virtually. Richard Ivory, our solicitor, is with us, and perhaps, Richard, you'd just like to give us a little update on what will need to happen if we're going to continue to meet virtually post-May, or if we don't, what happens then, Richard?
Certainly, Chairman. Evening, members. Yes, the legislation expires. That's the long and short of it at the moment. There was primary legislation by the government towards the start of the first round of the pandemic, and there was a sunset clause. So unfortunately, the legislation can't be extended unless it goes to Parliament with all the ramifications that entails. However, there are discussions going on with the government, as you'd expect, primarily through the LGA. So I think we can reasonably confidently expect there to be new legislation suggesting that the virtual meetings, like them or loathe them, will have to continue for the foreseeable future. Without that legislation, we would have to go back to the traditional style of meetings, which I'm sure most members would appreciate at the moment is probably not something that we would prefer to be doing, all sitting in the same room, however much we all miss each other. So we'll wait with bated breath to see how long the legislation takes to go through. I will email members when I get anything through that suggests that we have a new regime in place. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. So the recommendation is that we approve the schedule of meetings. Seeing no signifying to the contrary, then that is done. So that brings us to the end of the meeting. So thank you very much, everybody, for your participation. And I will close the meeting at this point and ask that the broadcast is ceased.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.